The storm doesn't break the chosen. It reveals them. Right now, as you're hearing these words, something ancient is stirring. This isn't coincidence. This isn't algorithm. This is divine interruption. You were pulled here because heaven has been trying to get your attention. And what I'm about to tell you will explain why your life has felt like a battlefield for so long. They told you that power comes from position, that victory requires validation, that blessing needs approval from the crowd. But what if? What if everything they taught you about strength was designed to keep you weak? What if your silence wasn't surrender, but strategy? What if your isolation wasn't abandonment, but preparation? Listen carefully, chosen one. While you were questioning your worth, wondering why the doors seemed locked, why the attacks felt so personal, why the warfare was so intense, something was happening in the realm you couldn't see. Forces that tried to bury you before you even knew what you carried. Voices that whispered you'll never make it while heaven was sealing your victory in stone. They counted you out while you were counting stars. They gambled on your ghost, but you buried that version in silence. Before we go deeper into this divine revelation, I want to pause and say thank you to every single one of you who has supported this message through Super Thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. You're planting seeds in fertile ground, and heaven sees every act of faith. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here, your support, your time, your attention. It all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and let your spirit respond as it's led. Now, what I'm about to reveal will shatter the lie that your pain was pointless, that your waiting was wasted, that your tears fell into void. Because while they were planning your funeral, heaven was designing your coronation. While they were writing your obituary, the universe was rewriting your story. And what happened next? What happened next made the darkness tremble. The victory isn't coming, chosen one. It's already here, and they know it. This is your divine alarm, the one heaven set before time began. And what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about your purpose, your pain, and your power. The question isn't whether you won. The question is, are you ready to walk like it? They thought fear would break you. It backfired. You know what they did, don't you? They came at you sideways, whispering poison in boardrooms you weren't invited to. They scattered lies like seeds, hoping to grow doubt in every heart that once believed in you. They threw dirt not just on your name, but on your dreams, your character, your calling. They buried you alive in rumors, rejection, and calculated cruelty. And then they sat back and waited for you to disappear. But here's what they didn't understand about the chosen. Here's what they couldn't calculate in all their scheming. You don't break the same way others do. You don't wither under pressure, you grow deeper roots. Every shovel of dirt they threw became the very soil where something sacred was planted. Every lie they told became fertilizer for a truth so powerful it would bloom beyond their wildest nightmares. They buried you in lies, but heaven remembered where it planted you. You see, while they were busy digging your grave, the divine was preparing your garden. Every attack wasn't just random cruelty. It was cosmic permission. Permission to rise, permission to transform, permission to show this world what happens when you try to bury someone who was never meant to stay underground. You didn't fight fire with fire, you transcended the battlefield entirely. Remember those sleepless nights when their words echoed in your head like broken records? When you questioned your own worth because their poison had seeped so deep? You thought you were being destroyed, but something else was happening. Something they couldn't see. Something they couldn't stop. You were being refined. Every insult was burning away what was never truly you. Every rejection was clearing space for something greater. Every door they slammed was redirecting you toward the one marked with your name. You were never a victim, you were soil for something sacred. The beautiful, terrible truth is this: they became the unwitting gardeners of your destiny. Every shovel of shame they threw, every seed of scandal they planted, every attempt to bury your light, it all became the foundation for what you were always meant to become. They thought they were writing your ending. They were actually composing your beginning. You didn't fall, you rose. You didn't run, you stood. You didn't flinch, you smiled. And that smile, oh, that quiet, knowing smile, it haunted them more than any retaliation ever could, because it told them something their spirit recognized, even when their mind refused to accept it. You knew something they didn't. You carried something they couldn't touch. You were connected to something they couldn't cut. While they were busy playing God with your reputation, the real God was busy preparing your revelation. There's a moment, maybe you remember it, when the attack stopped feeling personal and started feeling prophetic. When you realized their hatred wasn't about you at all. It was about what you represented, what you carried, what you threatened just by existing in your truth. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the light that exposed their shadows. They weren't attacking your character. They were attacking the mirror that showed them their own. That's when you knew. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about surviving their storm. This was about becoming the calm that would make their chaos look foolish. You stopped defending yourself because heaven was already building your case. Picture this. While they whispered in corners, building their little kingdoms of gossip and spite, you were walking in silence towards something they couldn't even imagine. Every step you took away from their drama was a step closer to your destiny. Every word you didn't say in retaliation became a prayer that heaven heard and answered. Every tear you cried in private became holy water that blessed the very ground they tried to curse. The attacks weren't punishment, they were permission to rise. And rise you did, not with noise, not with spectacle, not with revenge, but with something far more powerful, with purpose, with presence, with the quiet authority that comes from knowing you've been tested in fire and emerged as pure gold. You rose like morning after the longest night, inevitable and undeniable. Now look at you. Look at what grew from that dirt they threw. Look at the garden that bloomed from their burial ground. Every flower in your field of victory carries the DNA of their defeat. Every fruit that hangs from your tree of triumph was watered by their tears of regret. What they meant for evil became your foundation for extraordinary. They buried you in lies, but heaven remembered where it planted you. And what heaven plants, hell cannot uproot. You are the living proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming so beautifully, powerfully, undeniably yourself that their very presence in your story becomes a footnote to your glory. You didn't just survive their darkness, you transformed it into light. You didn't just overcome their opposition, you turned it into your opportunity. This is what the chosen do. This is what sets you apart. You don't just endure attacks, you alchemize them. You don't just survive storms, you emerge from them carrying rain for others' droughts. You don't just overcome obstacles, you transform them into stepping stones for those who come behind you. So, let them see you now. Let them watch what grew from the grave they dug. Let them witness the garden that bloomed from the dirt they threw. Because your victory isn't just personal, it's prophetic. It's a living sermon that declares to every soul who's ever been buried by betrayal, this is not your ending, this is your beginning. You were never meant to stay buried, you were planted. They thought fear would break you, it backfired. You see, chosen one, there comes a moment in every divine story where the noise stops, where the shouting dies down, where the chaos that once controlled your every response suddenly doesn't. And in that moment, something shifts. Not just in you, but in the very fabric of reality around you. Because what they mistook for surrender was actually the most dangerous thing you could ever do. You stopped talking back. Let that settle in your spirit for a moment. You stopped defending yourself to people who were never going to see you clearly anyway. You stopped explaining your worth to those who had already decided you were worthless. You stopped performing on stages where the audience was never going to clap. And in that silence, in that holy, terrifying silence, heaven began to move. They thought you fell off, but you were falling into alignment. See, the world teaches us that power is loud, that strength means striking back, that if you don't defend yourself, you're weak. But the chosen operate by different laws, ancient laws, divine laws that say the meek inherit the earth, that the last shall be first, that those who save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life will find it. Your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. While they were busy making noise, you were making moves. While they were screaming into the void, you were listening to the voice. the one that whispers instead of shouts, the one that builds instead of destroys, the one that said, "Be still and know that I am God." You didn't fight fire with fire, you transcended the battlefield. Think about it. How many arguments did you walk away from? How many provocations did you let slide? How many times did they bait you, hoping you'd explode, hoping you'd lose your composure, hoping you'd give them the reaction they needed to justify their treatment of you? And how many times did you just not give it to them? That wasn't weakness, beloved. That was warfare, spiritual warfare of the highest order. Because every time you refused to react, you were essentially saying, "I don't need to defend what heaven has already declared." Every time you stayed quiet, you were trusting that divine justice would speak louder than any words you could ever form. The absence of your reaction became the loudest rebuke. You want to know what scared them? It wasn't your anger. Anger they could handle. Anger they could predict. Anger they could use against you. What terrified them was your peace, your stillness, your refusal to be moved by their chaos. Because people who thrive on drama suffocate in the presence of someone who won't feed it. Your silence became a mirror, and they hated what it reflected. In your quietness, they saw their own emptiness. In your stillness, they felt their own restlessness. In your peace, they were confronted with their own chaos. You didn't have to say a word. Your very presence became a sermon they couldn't turn off, a truth they couldn't unhear, a light that exposed everything they were trying to hide. They mistook your quiet for defeat, not knowing heaven was loading your next move. While you were silent, something else was speaking. The universe was taking notes. Divine justice was building a case. Heaven's courtroom was in session, and every lie they told about you, every attack they launched against your character, every attempt they made to diminish your light was being entered into evidence. You see, chosen one, there's something the enemy doesn't understand about divine timing. He thinks silence means inactivity. He thinks stillness means defeat. He thinks when you stop fighting back, you've given up. But what he doesn't realize is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing, because when you refuse to play their game, you force them to play yours and your game. Your game is rigged in your favor by the very hand of the Almighty. You didn't need to argue because truth doesn't debate with lies. You didn't need to defend because innocence doesn't apologize to guilt. You didn't need to explain because light doesn't justify itself to darkness. The chosen don't shout, they shift. And you shifted everything. The atmosphere, the energy, the very foundation of every room you entered. Not with words, but with presence. Not with noise, but with power. The kind of power that comes from knowing who you are and whose you are, regardless of who recognizes it. Your silence became a weapon they never saw coming. Because how do you fight someone who won't fight back? How do you win an argument with someone who won't argue? How do you defeat someone who's already standing in victory? They threw stones, and you built altars. They brought chaos, and you brought calm. They came with war, and you responded with worship. And in that response, or lack thereof, you did something extraordinary. You made their noise irrelevant. Every insult bounced off your peace. Every attack fell short of your position. Every lie crumbled in the presence of your truth, not because you defended yourself, but because you didn't need to. The light doesn't argue with darkness, it just shines. And you, beloved chosen one, you kept shining. In the silence, divine recalibration began. Your spirit was being tuned to a frequency they couldn't access. Your heart was being aligned with purposes they couldn't understand. Your mind was being renewed with thoughts they couldn't think. And your life was being repositioned for a victory they never saw coming. Because while they were watching you fall, heaven was watching you rise. While they were measuring your defeat, eternity was measuring your crown. While they were writing your obituary, the divine was rewriting your destiny. Your silence wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of their education and who they had been dealing with all along. And now they know. Now they see. Now they understand what happens when you corner someone who was never trapped to begin with. When you attack someone who was already seated in heavenly places. When you try to silence someone whose voice echoes in eternity. They thought your quiet meant you were finished. They had no idea you were just getting started. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. You see, chosen one, The moment you stepped into this realm, alarms went off in places you've never been. Boardrooms in the darkness, strategy sessions in the shadows, because what they saw wasn't just another soul walking the earth. What they detected was a frequency that could shatter their foundation. You weren't just born, you were deployed. The warfare you've endured your entire life, it was never personal, it was prophetic. They weren't attacking you for who you were in that moment. They were attacking you for who heaven said you would become. Every betrayal, every door that slammed shut, every relationship that turned toxic, every opportunity that evaporated right before your eyes, none of it was random. All of it was reconnaissance. You've been wondering why the battles felt so intense, so targeted, so specific. Why it seemed like the universe had your address and kept delivering pain with surgical precision. Here's why. You carry generational clearance codes, spiritual DNA that unlocks what's been locked, breaks what's been bound, exposes what's been hidden. You weren't just marked as chosen, you were sealed as dangerous. The enemy studied your bloodline like a case file, traced your ancestry like a treasure map. Because somewhere in your spiritual genetics, there's a combination that opens vaults hell tried to keep sealed forever. That's why the attacks started early. That's why they felt personal. That's why they never stopped. They weren't trying to hurt you. They were trying to silence you before you learned to speak your own name with power. Every insecurity they fed you was designed to keep you from discovering what you actually carry. Every limitation they whispered was meant to cage what heaven released. Every door they closed was an attempt to redirect you away from the path that leads to their destruction. But here's what they didn't count on. The same force that marked you also protected you. You didn't survive by accident. You survived by assignment. While they were throwing everything they had at your peace, your purpose, your identity, something else was happening in the realm you couldn't see. Angels were taking notes. Heaven was recording evidence. The divine court was building a case that would make every attack backfire into a blessing. Every wound they inflicted became a weapon in your hands. Every tear they caused became fuel for your fire. They thought they were breaking you down, but the universe was breaking you open, breaking open the shell around your real power, breaking open the walls around your true identity, breaking open the limitations around your actual calling. What felt like destruction was actually construction. Divine architecture using their own hatred as building material for your throne. You've been carrying something they can't replicate, can't steal, can't counterfeit, an anointing that doesn't come from earth, authority that wasn't voted on by committees, power that wasn't handed out by institutions. You carry the signature of the Most High, and that signature disrupts every system built on lies. That's why your presence makes certain people uncomfortable. That's why your silence speaks louder than their noise. That's why your peace threatens their chaos. You're not just walking through life, you're walking with a frequency that exposes what's counterfeit and activates what's authentic. You're a living lie detector, a walking truth serum, a breathing revelation. The attacks were custom because so is your mantle. Every strategy they used against you revealed how dangerous you actually are. They don't send spiritual assassins after average souls. They don't deploy full-scale warfare against ordinary people. The intensity of their resistance was actually a confession, a testimony to your importance, proof of your power, evidence of your calling. While you were questioning your worth, they were calculating your threat level. While you were doubting your purpose, they were designing their defense. While you were wondering if you mattered, they were building entire systems to make sure you never discovered that you do. But you did survive. You did endure. You did make it through every storm they sent. Not because you were lucky, because you were loaded. Loaded with divine ammunition. Loaded with spiritual intelligence. Loaded with heavenly backing. You weren't fighting alone. You were fighting with an army they couldn't see. Every time they thought they had you cornered, you found a way out they didn't calculate. Every time they thought they had you silenced, your spirit found new ways to speak. Every time they thought they had you defeated, you rose with strength that came from somewhere they couldn't trace. Because what flows through your veins doesn't originate on this planet. You carry the blood of warriors who never surrendered, the DNA of prophets who never compromised, the spiritual genetics of kings who never bowed to kingdoms built on corruption. That's what they were really fighting, not you. what lives in you, what moves through you, what speaks when you open your mouth in truth. They didn't fear you. They feared what wakes up when you stop doubting. And now you're starting to remember, starting to recognize, starting to realize that every scar they left was actually a seal. Every wound they opened was actually a doorway. Every battle they forced you to fight was actually training for a war you were born to win. The warfare wasn't random, it was strategic. And now you know why. Because what you carry doesn't just change you, it changes everything around you. Your anointing breaks blueprints. Your authority disrupts agendas. Your awakening ends their empire. They thought the war was against you, but the war was always about what you carry. And that war is over. They lost the moment you survived. They lost the moment you endured. They lost the moment you decided to keep walking, even when walking hurt. The battle that tried to break you only revealed what they were really fighting, and what they were fighting is unbreakable, unstoppable, undeniable. You weren't born to be a casualty of their war. You were born to be the reason they surrender. They thought your silence was surrender. They didn't know it was you taking your power back. Listen to me, chosen one. There was a moment, maybe you remember it, maybe it felt so quiet you almost missed it, when something inside you just stopped begging, stopped explaining, stopped performing for people who never had the capacity to see you anyway. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a speech. You just unplugged. And the moment you did, the earth shifted beneath their feet. See, they had built their entire kingdom on your need for their approval. Your desperation was their currency. Your hunger for validation was what kept their circus running. They needed you to keep clapping, keep cheering, keep begging for a seat at tables they never intended to give you anyway. But then you did something that broke their system entirely. You stopped waiting to be chosen. That's when heaven reminded you you already were. You stopped showing up to auditions for roles you were never meant to play. You stopped explaining your worth to people who couldn't afford your presence. You stopped dancing for coins when God had already deposited crowns into your account. And suddenly their whole game fell apart. Because here's what they never told you, chosen one. Their power was an illusion. It was smoke and mirrors held together by your participation. The moment you withdrew your energy, their empire started crumbling. Not because you fought them, not because you exposed them, but because you simply left. You didn't fight fire with fire, you transcended the battlefield. And oh, how they scrambled, how they called your name from stages you'd already outgrown, how they tried to lure you back with false promises and manufactured urgency. Come back, they whispered. We need you. But you heard what they really meant. We need your desperation. We need your applause. We need you small, so we can feel significant. But you had tasted something they couldn't offer. You had found your worth in the whisper of the divine, not in the roar of the crowd. You had learned to clap for yourself in the silence, and that sound, that sacred sound, echoed louder than any stadium they could fill. The circus collapsed because the real lion left the tent. You see, they never understood what they were dealing with. They thought you were just another performer, another soul hungry for their crumbs. They didn't know you were carved from different stone. They didn't know your validation came from a source they couldn't touch, couldn't buy, couldn't manipulate. When you stopped needing their yes, their no lost all its power. When you stopped fearing their rejection, their acceptance became irrelevant. When you stopped performing for their pleasure, you discovered something revolutionary. You had been the main attraction all along. God promotes those who no longer beg for rooms he didn't build. And now, look at you. Look how you move. No desperation in your step. No hunger in your eyes for what they're selling. You walk with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their table has already been prepared. You speak with the authority of someone whose name was written in books they'll never read. They wanted you desperate, begging, crawling back to their circus for another chance to be dismissed. Instead, you built your own arena. You became your own standing ovation. You learned the sacred art of being enough for yourself, while heaven cheered you on from the galleries they'll never access. Your silence became thunder. Your absence became presence. Your peace became power. And now they watch from the sidelines as you rise without their permission, succeed without their blessing, shine without their spotlight. They thought they were the gatekeepers, But you found the door they never knew existed, the one marked divine approval only. You stopped clapping for their circus, chosen one. And that's when the real show began. The show where you're not the performer begging for applause. You're the director, you're the producer, you're the star. And every step you take now writes a script they'll study for years, trying to understand how someone they discarded became someone they can't ignore. But you're not interested in their study sessions. You're too busy living the sequel they were never invited to write. Because when you stopped needing their circus, you discovered something beautiful. You had always been the one with the real magic, the real power, the real presence. They were just the temporary stage you practiced on before heaven called you home to your true arena. And now you perform for an audience of one, the only applause that matters, the only approval that lasts, the only validation that transforms desperate performers into chosen royalty. You didn't just leave their circus, chosen one. You proved it was never real to begin with. They thought the bloodline would claim you like it claimed all the rest. They were wrong. Listen to me, chosen one. What ran through your family for generations? The rage that turned fathers into strangers, the silence that swallowed mothers whole, the addiction that passed down like cursed inheritance, the patterns of pain that carved themselves into your DNA like ancient hieroglyphs, all of it came to a screeching halt when it collided with your name. You weren't just born into dysfunction. You were born to destroy it. They don't teach you this in Sunday school. But some souls come equipped with spiritual dynamite. Some people carry the divine assignment to walk into generational hell and blow the doors off. That's you. That's what you've been doing all these years, even when you thought you were just trying to survive. The curse that owned your bloodline met its expiration date the moment you decided enough was enough. You felt it early, didn't you? That weight on your shoulders that didn't belong to you. The anger that lived in your bones before you even had language for it. The sadness that seemed older than your years. You carried the spiritual debt of people you'd never met. Ancestors who died with their pain still breathing, still breeding, still bleeding into the next generation. But here's what the enemy miscalculated. Here's what hell didn't see coming. They sent that curse to destroy you, but instead, you absorbed it like spiritual lightning. You took every ounce of generational poison and let your faith filter it into fuel. You didn't fight fire with fire. You became the fire that consumed the curse. Every time you chose forgiveness over revenge, you broke a chain. Every time you spoke truth instead of keeping family secrets, you shattered a link. Every time you refused to pass the pain forward, you rewrote the script that your bloodline had been following like gospel for decades. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. The abuse that was supposed to silence you gave you a voice that could shake mountains. The abandonment that was meant to leave you empty filled you with enough compassion to heal an army. The betrayal that should have turned you bitter turned you into a blessing dispenser instead. You weren't just breaking patterns, you were rewriting the bloodline. And let me tell you something that will make the hair on your arms stand up. Every ancestor who died carrying that curse, every grandmother who went to her grave with secrets still burning in her chest, every grandfather who never learned how to love without leaving scars, they're all watching you now from the other side, and they're weeping with gratitude. Because you did what they couldn't do. You broke what they couldn't break. You spoke what they couldn't speak. The demons that chased your family met their expiration date when they ran into your name. But it wasn't easy, was it? There were nights when you felt like you were carrying the weight of 7 generations on your back. Moments when the darkness whispered that you were just like them, that you'd never escape, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But you proved something profound. You proved that one person walking in divine authority can override centuries of spiritual programming. You proved that the blood of the Lamb is thicker than the blood of the lineage. You proved that curses bow to choices, and you chose differently. You chose to bleed truth instead of venom. And when you did, something shifted in the heavenly courts. The case that had been building against your family for generations suddenly got dismissed. Not because of your perfection, but because of your persistence. Not because you never fell, but because you never stayed down. You became the generational circuit breaker that heaven had been waiting for. Now listen carefully, because this is where it gets holy. You didn't just break the curse for yourself, you broke it backwards and forwards. Every child that comes after you will walk on ground you cleared. Every future generation will breathe air you purified. And somehow, mystically, miraculously, Your obedience reached back through time and touched the pain of those who came before you. You healed wounds you never received. You spoke for voices that had been silenced. You stood for people who died on their knees. That's not just healing, that's resurrection power. And the most beautiful part, you didn't do it through violence or vengeance. You didn't fight the darkness by becoming darker. You outloved the hate. You out-endured the pain. You out-prayed the curse. You out-blessed the bitterness. You became the light that the darkness couldn't comprehend, couldn't compete with, couldn't survive. Every family gathering that you walked into carrying peace instead of poison, you were practicing warfare. Every time you refused to repeat the cycle, you were performing surgery on the spiritual realm. Every boundary you set, every truth you told, every pattern you refused to perpetuate was a nail in the coffin of generational bondage. The fury that was meant to consume you became the fire that purified your lineage. And now when the enemy looks at your family tree, he doesn't see vulnerability anymore. He sees you. He sees the one who stood up, who spoke up, who refused to shut up. He sees the curse breaker, the pattern disruptor, the bloodline reformer. You turned your family's greatest weakness into its greatest strength. So stop apologizing for being different. Stop feeling guilty for outgrowing the dysfunction. Stop carrying shame for refusing to repeat what broke everyone else. You weren't meant to fit into a broken system. You were meant to break the system and build something better. The curse stops here. The pain ends here. The silence dies here. Because you didn't just survive the storm. Chosen one, you became the eye of the storm that scattered every generational demon back to the pit where they belonged. And they will never, ever recover from what you did in that secret place where you chose healing over hatred, where you chose truth over tradition, where you chose love over the legacy of lies. You didn't just break free. You broke it all. And your children's children will call you blessed. They thought they were wounding you, but every strike was just the universe drawing up your divine architecture. Let them talk about how they hurt you. Let them sit in circles and joke about the betrayal, the backstabbing, the setups, and the sabotage. Let them smirk at the chaos they threw your way. Because while they were busy watching you break, they didn't realize something deeper was happening. You were learning. You weren't just getting hit. You were collecting data. You were mapping pressure points. You were decoding patterns that would become your survival manual, your strategic playbook, your holy blueprint for every battlefield that would follow. Every time they betrayed you, your intuition sharpened like a blade in fire. Every time you were left bleeding, your soul recorded it like sacred text. Pain didn't destroy you, it taught you. It handed you keys that only come from surviving what should have ended you. Keys to rooms they'll never enter, doors they'll never even see. That's what they don't get, chosen one. They thought they were throwing chaos at you to confuse you. But the chosen don't go numb under pressure. We go deeper. We don't react blindly. We read, we decode, we transform. And while they were hoping you'd explode in rage, you evolved quietly, coldly, cleanly. You became an architect in your own storm. You took the betrayal and turned it into blueprint. You turned manipulation into foresight. You turned rejection into self-worth so solid it couldn't be shaken by human opinion. You stopped needing to explain yourself because you started seeing through people without asking questions. You no longer respond emotionally to what you used to beg to understand, because now you see, and that terrifies them. They don't know how to move around you anymore. What used to trigger you now exposes them. What used to drain you now fuels your fire. You stopped taking things personally and started treating everything like information, cold, clear, calculated information that builds your inner fortress stone by stone. That's the level of wisdom pain handed you. That's why your presence is surgical now. You know who you are. And more importantly, you know who they are. Not because they told you, but because their betrayal revealed it. Their actions gave you X-rays of their soul. Their disloyalty gave you blueprints to every trap they thought you'd fall into. You weren't just walking through pain, chosen one. You were being trained by it. You were in a classroom disguised as a battlefield, and every lesson came written in tears, carved in heartbreak, sealed in the silence of nights when you thought you couldn't take another blow. But here you are, still standing, still building, still turning every wound into a window. Now you move differently, strategically, intuitively, with the precision of someone who's been trained in the dark arts of spiritual warfare. You speak less because you see more. You respond slower because you cut deeper. But only when necessary. Because now you know not everything deserves a reaction. But everything holds a lesson if you're wise enough to extract it. They thought you were naive. They thought the heartbreak would break you open and leave you empty, scattered, defenseless. But it only cracked the shell around your real power. It introduced you to parts of yourself you would have never found in comfort. Parts that don't flinch. Parts that don't forget. Parts that turn every betrayal into sacred geometry. That's the irony they'll never understand. They thought they were stopping you, but they were activating you. The wounds they left behind became sacred maps, holy blueprints, proof that you are exactly who the universe said you were. Not because you never fell, but because you never stayed down. Because every fall came with a lesson, and every lesson came with elevation. You see, that's the difference between the chosen and the cursed. When the cursed get hit, they repeat the cycle. They hurt others. They break down. They stay in the pattern. When the chosen get hit, we build from it. We turn injury into architecture. We transform pain into power. So let them keep trying. Let them throw shade, throw blame, throw knives. You already know the pattern. You already studied the design. You've memorized their playbook because you wrote your own from their mistakes. And now you're untouchable. Not because you don't feel, but because you understand. You've learned the art of turning injury into insight. You've mastered the sacred science of transformation. You've turned every scar into sacred geometry, every betrayal into divine mathematics. The pain didn't kill you, it structured you. It built you into something they can't break because you're no longer made of the same material. They thought they were breaking you open, but you were opening a cathedral. Every stone they threw became another pillar. Every lie they told became another stained glass window that lets light in but keeps the darkness out. Every betrayal handed you another blueprint for building something they could never imagine. Stop apologizing for how quiet you've become. Stop explaining your silence, your peace, your holy detachment. You earned this stillness. You earned this level of knowing. You earned this new version of yourself, the one who doesn't flinch anymore because you've seen it all, survived it all, and turned it all into something beautiful. Because when they sent you pain, they forgot one thing about the chosen. We don't just take the hit and fall down. We don't just survive and move on. We turn it into holy architecture. We build cathedrals from the very stones they threw at our heads. And now you're walking in buildings made of the very bricks they meant to bury you with. Every room designed by divine precision. Every wall fortified by wisdom they handed you without knowing it. Every door opening only to those who deserve access to the sanctuary you built from their chaos. That's your victory, chosen one. Not just that you survived, but that you turned their weapons into your blueprints, their betrayal into your foundation, their chaos into your cathedral. And every time they look at what you've built, they'll remember they provided the materials. They lit the match expecting you to dance in the flames, but you did something they never saw coming. You walked away. And in that silence, in that holy refusal to engage, you didn't just avoid their fire, you became something far more dangerous. You became untouchable. Listen to me, chosen one. They came for you with everything they had. Passive-aggressive texts at 2 a.m., social media posts designed to bait your response, conversations poisoned with your name, hoping the venom would somehow reach your bloodstream. They threw matches at your peace, expecting you to catch fire, to explode, to give them the show they desperately needed to feel powerful. But you didn't take the bait. You didn't grab the rope they threw to pull you back into their pit. And at that moment when you chose divine restraint over human reaction, that was when you became untouchable. That was when you transcended from victim to victor without throwing a single punch. You see, they needed your fire to survive. Your anger was their oxygen. Your pain was their entertainment. Your breakdown was their breakthrough. But when you refused to burn, when you chose peace over performance, something beautiful and terrible happened. They started suffocating on their own smoke. They thought they were lighting fires around you, but what they were really doing was revealing themselves. Every lie they told, every scheme they hatched, every trap they set, all of it exposed who they really were, while you remained mystery, dignity, untouchable grace. You didn't fight fire with fire. You transcended the battlefield entirely. While they were busy setting things ablaze, you were rising above the smoke, breathing clean air, walking in dimensions they couldn't even see. That's what real power looks like. Not the power to destroy, but the power to disappear from destruction entirely. And oh, how it tormented them. Your silence was louder than any scream they could have provoked. Your peace was more unsettling than any war you could have waged. Because people who live in chaos need chaos to survive. When you removed yourself from their dysfunction, you removed their life support. They swung at shadows while you were already gone. They fought phantoms while you were building kingdoms. They screamed into voids while you were walking in victory. Your absence from their drama became your presence and your purpose. But here's what they'll never understand about the chosen. We don't avoid battle because we're weak. We avoid unnecessary battles because we're wise. We don't run from confrontation because we're scared. We walk away from contamination because we're sacred. We don't refuse to fight because we can't win. We refuse to fight because we've already won. You let them burn in the trap they built for you. And while they were busy destroying themselves, you were busy becoming yourself. The real you. The healed you. The version of you that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone because your worth was never up for debate in the first place. They wanted to pull you down to their level so they could beat you with experience. But you did something that shattered their entire strategy. You elevated. You rose so high above their frequency that their signals couldn't even reach you anymore. They were broadcasting on channels you no longer received. Your detachment wasn't coldness. It was clarity. Your distance wasn't rejection. It was protection. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was sovereignty. You weren't being passive. You were being prophetic. Because true prophets don't always speak. Sometimes they just remove themselves from what's beneath their calling. And the beautiful irony? While they were trying to burn you down, you were already building fireproof. While they were hoping to watch you crumble, you were constructing foundations they couldn't shake. Your peace became your power. Your stillness became your strength. Your silence became their loudest defeat. You left them with their smoke. God filled you with his fire. Not the kind of fire that destroys, but the kind that purifies. Not the kind that consumes, but the kind that creates. You became a walking flame that couldn't be extinguished because it wasn't fed by human fuel. It was fed by divine purpose. They thought your withdrawal meant they had won. They celebrated your silence like it was their victory. But what they didn't realize is that when the chosen remove themselves from toxic environments, those environments don't just lose a participant, they lose their light. They lose their conscience. They lose the very thing that was keeping them from completely destroying themselves. Your departure wasn't just your salvation, it was their revelation. Without you there to absorb their poison, they had to drink it themselves. Without you there to blame, they had to face themselves. Without you there to distract them from their emptiness, they had to sit with the echo of their own hollowness. And now they understand what they lost. Not just your presence, but your prayers. Not just your participation, but your protection. Because the chosen don't just walk in blessing, they carry covering. And when that covering is removed, the naked truth of who people really are becomes impossible to hide. You didn't just avoid their fire, chosen one. You became something fire cannot touch. You didn't just escape their trap. You transcended the very dimension where their traps exist. You didn't just win the battle. You eliminated the need for war entirely. That's the power of divine detachment. That's the strength of righteous withdrawal. That's the victory of choosing not to show up to fights you've already outgrown. You let them burn without you. And in that burning, they discovered something that will haunt them forever. They needed you more than you ever needed them. They were the flame. You were always the fire. They thought you were becoming, but the truth is, you were remembering. Let them gasp now. Let them act shocked, like this is some sudden windfall, like you just stumbled into favor, like the blessings came out of nowhere. Let them whisper behind closed doors about your overnight success, your mysterious rise, your unexpected breakthrough, because that's all they have left: confusion. They don't realize they're just watching the physical world catch up to what your spirit already knew. You didn't just earn this crown, chosen one. You already owned it. This was never about luck or coincidence or some last-minute miracle. You've been carrying this outcome in your spirit long before they ever saw a glimpse of it. The chosen don't manifest the future, we recall it. We walk with what's already written, and the rest of the world simply takes time to see what we've already claimed in silence. That's the part they'll never understand. They thought they could outwork you, outspeak you, outshine you, but this wasn't about talent or talk. It was about alignment. You weren't chasing, you were remembering. You were tuning your soul back to the frequency of what's already yours. And once that clicked, reality had no choice but to obey. You were never waiting on the win. The win was waiting on you to believe it, to accept it, to walk in it like it was already done. And now that you are, they can't stand it, because they watched you in the drought. They watched you in the silence. They saw you walk through valleys that would have eaten most people alive. And now they can't make sense of how you kept showing up with confidence, how you moved like the battle was already won. Because it was. You didn't fake it. You felt it deep in your bones, in your breath, in your being, the knowing, the promise, the quiet truth that whispered, it's already yours, even when everything around you looked like loss. That's what scares them. That your confidence wasn't tied to results. That your peace wasn't dependent on proof. That you kept building with no audience, kept trusting with no applause, kept glowing with no spotlight because you weren't performing for them. You were aligning with the divine. See, the universe doesn't operate on human timelines. It doesn't care who's watching, clapping, or doubting. It moves when energy aligns. And your energy, it's been holding royalty while your circumstances were still dressed like survival. That disconnect wasn't delusion, it was design. You held the crown in private long before the world handed you the throne in public. That's why this moment hits different. It's not a surprise. It's a return, a restoration, a reflection. You are witnessing the external catch-up to what's been alive inside you for years. The world is finally seeing the frequency you've been walking in. And they don't know how to react. Because to them, it's new. To you, it's just confirmation. They didn't believe because they couldn't see it. But the chosen don't wait for sight. We move on knowing. And now that you're here, don't you dare shrink to make them comfortable with your rise. This wasn't handed to you. This was activated in you. You endured the storm. You carried the weight. You sat in the silence when no one understood your vision. And now that it's here, walk in it like it's home. Because it is. You've already been crowned in the spirit. Reality is just adjusting its focus. And don't feel like you owe anyone the process. They didn't believe when it was invisible. They don't get to question it now that it's undeniable. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them create stories around your success. But the truth is simple. What they call a breakthrough is just you stepping fully into what's always been yours. You're not lucky. You're aligned. You're not just winning. You've already won. And now the rest of the world is just catching up to what your spirit celebrated a long time ago. The crown doesn't appear, chosen one. It's remembered. And you never forgot who you were, even when they tried to make you forget. You didn't grow into the crown. You woke up with it. They're clapping late. Heaven's already standing. They thought elevation was just another level. They didn't know you were about to vanish from their entire game. Listen to me, chosen one. What happened to you wasn't just growth. It wasn't just healing. It wasn't just victory. What happened was a spiritual evacuation. God didn't just lift you up, He pulled you out of their reach, out of their realm, out of the frequency where their poison could even find your signal. You didn't just level up. You dissolved from the battlefield entirely. They're still down there, swinging at shadows, throwing stones at echoes, screaming your name into a void that doesn't carry sound anymore. Because where you are now, their voices don't travel. Their lies don't stick. Their curses bounce off empty air. You became unreachable not by running away, but by ascending beyond the altitude where their darkness can breathe. Think about it. When was the last time their words actually wounded you? When was the last time their rejection actually stung? When was the last time you felt that old familiar ache when they tried to make you small? It's been a while, hasn't it? Because you're not there anymore. You're not vibrating at the frequency where their manipulation has power. Hell can't chase what God cloaked in light. You see, the enemy made one fatal mistake. He thought he was fighting your flesh. He thought he was battling your emotions, your insecurities, your human frailties. But what he didn't realize was that every attack, every betrayal, every moment of isolation was actually God's way of detaching you from everything that was keeping you earthbound. The pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation for flight. Every time they rejected you, another chain fell off. Every time they excluded you, another weight lifted. Every time they tried to make you feel small, God was actually making room for you to expand beyond their comprehension. They thought they were burying you. God was launching you. You didn't just overcome your enemies. You outgrew the entire battlefield. Now they look up and see nothing but sky where you used to stand. They reach for the levers that used to control your emotions and find them disconnected. They press the buttons that used to trigger your insecurities and nothing happens. Because the person they learned how to manipulate, the soul they thought they had figured out, the heart they believed they could break at will, that version of you died in the process of becoming who you are now. And who you are now? Untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because you built wings. The old you lived on their level, in their neighborhood, speaking their language of fear and limitation. The new you moved to a different dimension entirely. You didn't just change your address, you changed your existence. They're still sending mail to a house that no longer stands in a reality you no longer inhabit. This is what divine elevation really looks like. It's not about getting better at the game, it's about transcending the need to play at all. They used to know exactly which words would cut you. Now those same words fall like rain on stone, they slide right off without leaving a mark. They used to know exactly which situations would trigger your old wounds. Now you walk through those same scenarios like you're wearing armor made of pure light. Not because you're numb, but because you're operating from a place so high above their chaos that their storms look like puddles from where you stand. You didn't just break free from their control, you vanished from their entire system of power. And here's what's driving them absolutely mad. They can't figure out how to get to you anymore. They can't decode your new frequency. They can't crack your new code. They're still using the old manual to a soul that's been completely rewritten. They're speaking a language you no longer understand because you've learned to communicate directly with the divine. The silence they hear when they call your name isn't indifference, it's transcendence. You're not ignoring them, you're simply existing in a realm where their voices don't carry, where their drama doesn't register, where their chaos has no gravitational pull. You became unreachable not by hardening your heart, but by softening it so completely to God's voice that everything else sounds like static. This is why your presence feels different now. People can sense it even if they can't name it. There's something about you that feels untouchable. Not cold, not distant, but elevated. Like you're here but not here. Present but protected. Available but unbreachable. It's because you are. You're walking in a bubble of divine protection so complete that the very atmosphere around you carries the scent of heaven. The old frequencies that used to disturb your peace simply cannot penetrate the new altitude of your existence. You didn't just win the war, chosen one. You ascended beyond the need for warfare altogether. Beloved chosen ones, as we come to the end of this divine revelation, let me leave you with this unshakable truth. What God has done in your life cannot be undone. The victory you've walked into isn't temporary, it's eternal. The elevation you've experienced isn't luck, it's divine design. And the unreachable place you now occupy, that's your permanent address in the kingdom of heaven. Remember this, you didn't win because you were perfect. You won because you were persistent. You didn't overcome because you never fell. You overcame because you never stayed down. The pain that once defined you has now become the platform that elevates you. The silence that once isolated you has become the sanctuary where God speaks loudest. And hear me clearly, you are not walking this journey alone. Even in your most elevated state, even in your untouchable position, you are surrounded by a community of believers who understand your story. We are here, praying with you, standing with you, celebrating what God has done in your life. There are others who have walked this same path of refinement, who have experienced this same divine elevation, and who know exactly what it means to be chosen for something greater. In the comments below, I want you to know that this is sacred space. Share your heart. Tell us what this message awakened in your spirit. Ask for prayer if you need it. Encourage someone else who might be in the middle of their own storm. Because while you may be unreachable to the enemy, you are absolutely reachable to your spiritual family. We see you. We celebrate you. We stand with you. But before you go, let me ask you this soul-searching question. Now that you know you've already won, now that you understand you're walking in victory that's already been sealed, how will you carry this truth? How will you walk differently knowing that heaven has made you untouchable? How will you use your unreachable position to reach down and lift others who are still climbing? If this message has touched your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to remember their victory. Share it with someone who's still questioning whether they've won. Because somewhere out there, another chosen one is waiting to hear that their battle is already over, that their elevation is already complete, that they too have been made unreachable by the loving hand of God. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for allowing me to speak into your spirit. If this channel has become a source of encouragement in your life, I invite you to subscribe, to become part of this community of overcomers, of victors, of the beautifully unreachable children of the Most High. Father God, I come before you right now, on behalf of every precious soul who has heard this word. Lord, they've been through the fire and they came out gold. They've walked through the valley and they emerged victorious. They've endured the storm and they stand here crowned. I pray, Father, that you would seal this revelation deep in their hearts. Let them never forget that they are unreachable to the enemy's attacks, untouchable by the world's rejection, and unshakable in their divine identity. When doubt tries to whisper, let this truth roar louder. When fear tries to creep in, let this victory shine brighter. Lord, I ask you to continue the work you've begun in their lives. Open doors that no man can shut. Provide opportunities that exceed their imagination. Surround them with divine connections and holy relationships. Let their elevation inspire others, and let their unreachable position become a lighthouse for those still finding their way. Give them supernatural peace in their elevated place. Let them rest in the knowledge that you have lifted them beyond the reach of anything that once tormented them. Fill them with such confidence in their victory that they walk like the royalty. They are humble yet powerful, gentle yet unmovable, quiet yet unstoppable. And Father, for those watching who are still in the middle of their battle, still climbing toward their breakthrough, still believing for their elevation, let this message be the fuel they need to keep going. Let them see in these testimonies a preview of their own victory story. Bless every person who has engaged with this message. Bless their families, their finances, their futures. Let this be the beginning of a season where they walk fully in the understanding of who they are and what you've already accomplished in their lives. We thank you, Lord, that the victory is not coming, it's already here. We thank you that we are not hoping to be chosen, we already are. We thank you that we are not trying to become unreachable, we already have been lifted beyond the reach of anything that once held us down. In the mighty, victorious, all-powerful name of Jesus, we receive this truth, we walk in this reality, and we rest in this completed work. Amen and amen. You are victorious, beloved. You are unreachable. You are exactly where God always intended you to be. Until we meet again, walk in your victory. It's already yours.